Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to ACMI for today's talk, Little J and Big Cousin Conversation with Tony Thorne, Dot West, Ned Lander and Clare Madsen. My name's Arieh Offman and I'm a public programmer and video games curator here at ACMI. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that today's talk takes place on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging, to First Nations people who are on the panel here today, any in the audience and to any watching along at home. Well, thank you all for joining us today and a look behind the scenes of the award-winning show Little J and Big Cuz. Let's meet some of the minds behind it. Firstly, writer Dot West. A Nyungar woman based in the Kimberley region, Dot has worked in the Indigenous media industry for over 30 years in various capacities. She's written content for both Indigenous radio and television services, including scriptwriter and co-producer for The Circuit, Series 1 and 2, winning an Augie Award. Dot's projects have included writing a number of short dramas and documentaries, script writing on the Logie Award-winning children's animation series Little J and Big Cuz, and the ABC drama series The Heights. Dot is currently a non-executive director of SBS, director of Gulari Media Enterprises and Rami Productions in Broome, and a member of the Screen West Industry Advisory Group. Since 2014, Dot has been the co-facilitator of the Gulari Writers Program, where she's been able to support emerging Indigenous writers. In 2014, Dot was awarded an honorary doctorate from Swinburne University of Technology for her work in the community media sector, and in 2019 she received a First Nations Media Lifetime Achievement Award. Please put your hands together for Dot West. Next we have director Tony Thorne. Tony's endearing character design and vivid sense of place for Little J and Big Cuz is the culmination of his rich and diverse experience as an animation director, illustrator, visual artist, author of graphic novels and comic book illustrator. Tony completed a Masters of Arts in Computer Animation at AFTRS. His acclaimed graduation film led to a decade of senior animation positions in the UK on high-profile features including animation supervisor on Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, senior animator on The Hunger Games, Happy Feet 2, District 9 and Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, and lead animator on Ella Enchanted and Valiant. Tony maintains his practice as a visual artist and his work is held in the collections of the Burnie Regional Art Gallery and the National Portrait Gallery. Group shows include Animated at the National Portrait Gallery, the Graphic Art of Contemporary Comics at the National Gallery Canberra and National Cartoonists Exhibition at Raw Studios in Melbourne. Please put your hands together for Tony Thorne. Next up we have producer Ned Lander. Ned's vast experience of cross-cultural filmmaking, coupled with decades of storytelling for both big and small screens, brings richness and authenticity to Little J and Big Cuz. A producer, writer, director and former SBS broadcast executive, Ned produced Series 1 and 2 of Little J and Big Cuz, which were highly successful, both with Indigenous children and their families and with the wider children's television audience. The series has received multiple accolades, including a Logie for Most Outstanding Children's Program, Atom, Augie and SDIN Awards. Ned was an executive producer of acclaimed and adored feature film Last Cab to Darwin and produced the feature film Radiance. Radiance was voted most popular film at the Melbourne and Sydney International Film Festivals and was in official selection at the Toronto and London International Film Festivals. In 2021, it was digitally restored by the National Film and Sound Archive. Please put your hands together for Ned Lander. And last but definitely not least, we have script producer Clare Madsen. Clare is a script producer on NITV's first animated series, the Logie, Augie and Adam Award-winning Little J and Big Cuz. Her screen credits span situation and sketch comedy, children's live action and animation. Clare's writing for children has been nominated for AFI and Augie Awards, and credits include Zigbee, Magic Mountain, Sydney Sailboat and Tadar. Clare is an award-winning short film writer and director. Her award-winning short film Edithvale screened at international film festivals including Edinburgh, Palm Springs, Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. Clare also has wide experience as a playwright and director in fringe and cabaret settings, young people's theatre, and theatre in regional communities. She's created works for Arena Theatre, Flying Fruit Fly Circus, and Melbourne Fringe and Comedy Festivals. A Bachelor of Education majoring in drama, Clare was a guest lecturer creating theatre with Indigenous student actors and educators at the Institute for Curie Education for 8 years. In 2019, she ran the screenwriting workshops for AFTR's Diversity Talent Camp in Perth, Melbourne and Hobart. Finally, please put your hands together for Clare Madsen. An amazing team that has led to an amazing show. First, Tony, might kick off with a question for you. What's the thinking behind the design of the world of Little J and Big Cuz?
I think the most important thing was really to make it feel Australian and it's a big continent with a little Tasmanian island, which is where I'm from. One thing that I didn't say, I'm also a Truaway descendant. So that was part of the reason why I became the director of the show. I was really interested in trying to capture a sense of Australian light and a lot of things that you don't really see in cartoons, which tend to have a very generic feel in terms of the backgrounds in particular. So really trying to make it feel like Australia. And we had many different landscapes that we knew we wanted to portray. So that wasn't a simple exercise of like apply one rule for all. So there was a lot, with every aspect of design, I think in any cartoon, you think about it a lot. But there was a lot of toing and froing about those things early on and how they worked as you're scrambling to get a show together and make it happen. So.
Great, and I guess that's probably fed a bit into the philosophy behind the character design as well.
Yeah, certainly the character design was the thing that daunted me the most, because what we knew we wanted to do from the beginning, and many people were saying it would be kind of a problem, was this household isn't from anywhere in particular, and because we've really wanted to be as inclusive as possible, so that particularly Aboriginal families from anywhere in Australia could identify with that family and think that they might be just over the back fence. So there was a lot of rounds of feedback for that, much less so for the landscapes, but for the characters we had many iterations. And you will see, most of the stuff that's being shown as the slides is not stuff that you'll see in shows. It's stuff that we use as development material for the show. So some of which got changed a number of times, like even this image, just you can see the bedroom's actually through that room there where the washing machine is in the actual show. So these were the sort of formative things, but the thing that really went through many iterations were the characters. And there were a lot of Indigenous opinions, so about skin colour, particularly that, I think, was a really big one. But it's also, it's a very tricky age to portray for the kids. We really had to get the kids right. And because was a feisty girl, pre-adolescent, who had to be appealing, was a very, very tricky thing to settle on. And yeah, there would have been 30 or 40 goes at that, and a lot of help from our animation director Neil, who's here in the audience, and several other people to try and get to that point.
Great. Well, maybe it's good to go right back to the start. So, Ned, do you want to take us back and tell us how Little J and Big Cuz came about? What's the background to the show's creation?
So the show started with an initiative from a Melbourne outfit called the Australian Council for Education Research. And they'd sort of thought about television generally, and they'd looked at things like Sesame Street and a whole in Play School and a whole range of other programs. And they came to me and asked me about developing a show, and I said, go and talk to Rachel Perkins and Darren Dale at Blackfella Films. And Darren and Rachel said, we're way too busy doing whatever the many things they're doing, Redfern Now or, Total Control or whatever they were developing, and sent them back to me. And we went round the block a few times, and eventually we decided we would try and go ahead and do something together. And so I brought together a group of writers, all sorts of different people, Leah Purcell and Adrian Wills and Margaret Harvey and a range of people, and that team gradually built. Tony came in, and we started to think about some of the really big questions. There's also a very significant input from a woman called Priscilla Reid-Loynes, who is an Aboriginal early years education expert, and she had a really big input into thinking about how to approach the show. But this thing that Tony was talking about was really central, which was this really tricky question, which was how to make a TV show for a country with more First Nations peoples than you can count, and to make it meaningful to all those different nations, and at the same time to make it a national show. Like we'd looked at other shows and people in different parts of Australia go, oh yeah, we really like that mob, that's that so-and-so mob show, not our show. Mm-hmm. And so animation presented as a really obvious vehicle because it involves a level of abstraction anyway in terms of the background and so on, but obviously, as Tony said, we wanted freshwater country, we wanted saltwater country, we wanted desert country. One day we'll do snow country, if the budget allows. But we needed to cover all these different countries and all these different ways of doing it. But then the other big thing that animation offers, as well as this kind of stylisation that allows you to sort of create larger groups in those areas, the other thing it offers, obviously, is the really simple process of revoicing. And that meant we could potentially, and we had no idea whether we could make this work, but potentially we could take the show all around Australia, responding to interest from communities and revoice it in the language of that community. That's been a big job. We're only done 15 languages so far across Australia, but that's a good start and something that can continue. During that whole process, we had a lot of expert input around things like there's a framework called the Early Years Learning Framework, which is adopted by all state and federal government and has been the sort of centrepiece for many years, and it goes to questions about the fact that children can't really learn unless they have a strong sense of identity, they can't learn unless they feel safe, they can't learn if they're not well enough fed, they can't, there's a whole lot of elements to this and it extends. And Priscilla had done an Indigenous interpretation of the Early Years Learning Framework. So that gave us a sort of academic and intellectual sort of framework for the show, which allowed us to develop it further. And then there's a whole lot of other, I'll finish up now, but there's a whole lot of other elements around things Tony was talking about, skin colour and different hair and around all sorts of design elements. We had serious arguments about whether one of the doors on the cupboard in Nana's kitchen could be hanging off or whether it had to be properly attached, or whether there could be an old wrecked car body in the back garden or not. These things went on for some time. So yeah,
very strong opinions both ways.
And it had a lot of consultation is the other aspect to this. And Dot became a very significant player in terms of that consultation. But I remember coming in around body language and all that.
I like to term it as engagement.
Engagement. That's right. That's a better word.
Dot, Claire, can you take us a little bit behind the scenes and tell us how do you come up with your stories and scripts? What's that process like?
Go on. No room.
Okay, so we, up until Series 4, which we're in development for now, we've brought together a number of writers into a story conferencing room, and we talk through a number of sort of stimuluses to kind of get everyone thinking. We make lists of universal childhood experiences for a 5-year-old, universal childhood experiences for a 9-year-old, and then the writers reflect on what were really specific cultural experiences as a 5-year-old and as a 9-year-old. We go on imaginative journeys around your favourite places to play as a child, your favourite games, your favourite places in the playground, worst day at school, best day at school. one of the principles behind the show, one of the philosophies behind the show was to reflect school as a positive experience. This is with working with the Australian Centre for Educational Research. But we always see Little J as being education by stealth. First and foremost, it's entertainment. And then once we've, sort of with whiteboards, listed all of those experiences, we look at that and writers put elements together and start to build a story in that way. And then we always ask the question, what makes this uniquely a Little J story? What you wouldn't see this on, other preschool animations. What makes this specifically for that world? And Dot, the first one for you was Right Under Your Nose.
Yeah, right under your nose. So Claire makes us go back into, which is a long journey back for some, like myself. But she does make us go back into our childhood and to try and remember moments of that childhood. However, my very first episode for Little J and Big Cuz was Right Under Your Nose. And that was actually inspired by a Loonig cartoon.
Okay.
So the Loonig cartoon is, a parent and a child sitting down watching TV at I think it was either a sunrise or a sunrise or a sunset, and then right out the window there's the same sunrise and sunset. So you would have seen in that clip Little J and Big Cuz looking at the beach, and then they go off to the beach and it's the same image. So, how to be inspired by reality. So that particular story was very much inspired by that, but it was also, pulling together some of the information out of the writer's room as well.
I'm interested to know, how many of the plot lines are very autobiographical?
For me, yeah, there's a few. There's a few for me. Few stories that it's either drawn from my own lived experience or aspects drawn from my own lived experience, or it's what I observe through my grandkids and also what I saw through my own children. So, yeah.
Was there a particular story that you're fond of that's come from your own experience?
Well, we're going to see Serpent's
there's
Eye.
one here.
Yeah, Serpent's Eye, I suppose.
Yeah.
As a young kid, we had this huge yard that we could play in, and I went off, just playing and digging in the dirt. And then I came across this eye as I dug deeper, and I ran away petrified because, to me at the time, I thought it was the devil. But we changed it a bit to make it a bit nicer. Not so much the devil, I suppose the devil was very much being raised on the Christian belief system. But what we came to was very much a cultural belief. So really it was looking at the two different creative stories, the Aboriginal creation story and the Christian creation story, and very much diving into the Aboriginal one. Because I later, as a young high school student, I later revisited that dilemma of Christianity and Aboriginal belief systems, and I wrote a paper for school and basically compared Christianity with our traditional belief system. And, my thesis at the end was I'd much rather believe in the Aboriginal creation story. My teacher wasn't that impressed with my result to that, but never mind. So, Serpent's Eye is very much a culmination of all of those things of my childhood memory and my teenage memory, yeah.
And we're going to see a little bit of Serpent's Eye a little bit later in the talk. But what's the importance and the impact of Little J and Big Cuz for Indigenous kids across Australia?
Look, you know, whether it's Little J or Big Cuz or whether it's any other First Nations content on screen, it's vitally important that we're able to get representation of ourselves as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. For far too long, we have sat within our own country, sitting on the fringes, sitting on the periphery of society, and whether that's as you walk down the street or whether it's as you view your TV screen. So Little J and Big Cuz helps to place us as a people at the centre of this Australian society. And it has the power of being able to allow our children to see versions of themselves. It also allows grandparents and parents to be able to see versions of themselves, and that's really empowering. So it's extremely strong, and there needs to be more of it.
Can I just pick up
Please
on a
do,
little
Ned.
point there, which is that the interesting thing being that defining an audience as 4 to 6 year old Aboriginal children or Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander children is a pretty tight little demographic definition, you know. Often when filmmakers are asked, oh, who's your film for? They say, oh, it's for everyone, you know. This incredibly tight definition has actually been really, really powerful for us. And the show's now playing to 1.4 million kids. It's massive. It's the second biggest show in Australia after, you know, Bluey. And you have lots of Aboriginal kids watching it and identifying because their hero is Aboriginal. But you have little white kids watching it, and, you know, we've got a quote from a letter of a little kid calling out to his mother, Mum, come and look at this. It's us. It's us. It's Australia. And he was seeing himself, and he was hearing an Australian voice that wasn't American, wasn't fast, wasn't overloaded with music. And that sense of identity was very connected in that way too. So it has both those aspects to it.
Absolutely, and whilst our target audience are 4 to 6 year olds, we know very well that parents, grandparents, great grannies fall in love with the show. So, yeah.
And older kids. A lot of older kids are watching it as well.
Even though they won't admit it.
And a lot of adults. And I think another really important part of this is as you've mentioned before, it's been developed into, 15 different language versions now?
Yeah.
So can you tell us a bit about this process? What were maybe some of the challenges that you've come up against, but also some of the benefits of doing it in this way?
Well, we've done a few sets through Galari Media, which Dot was instrumental in setting up, and that's up in Broome. Walmajari, Yaru, Gidja have all been done through that organisation, and we tend to sort of try and get people working in the regional areas that are either connected to communities or in communities. We have a sort of two things we look at. We look at the moment, this can expand, but at the moment we look at really big languages because lots of people are speaking those languages, and we look at really, really small languages that are in danger. So the Gidja's 300 people at the moment, I think, that speak Gidja, and that's, you know, clearly not a big number, but they were very interested to engage and to do it, and so we've also been very responsive to interest from...
And also, you know, in terms of Yaru is a language that has been reviving for a number of years. I've got a 22-year-old granddaughter that started learning Yaru when she was in primary school. And so, you know, the school continues to teach the language as well as language lessons in the community for community members. So it's important to strengthen that language with, you know, putting Yaru voice to this show.
And in the case of Tasmania, it's a completely reconstructed language from mostly whitefellow dictionaries that led to the Palawakani. So, and we've done 3 episodes in Palawakani as well. But the number of speakers is probably, you know, maybe 300 people.
And I think that the ability to not only see yourself on screen, but also to be able to hear your own language on screen must be a really powerful tool for representation and mean a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. It is very, very powerful, and I think it's just the way of being able to strengthen language and strengthen culture, and being able to strengthen that nation's identity. So it is powerful.
And it is their choice too. So they choose an episode that's relevant to them. So that connection becomes really strong, and then the episode becomes a learning tool in itself. And it's become, certainly the Palawakani ones have become very important as a teaching tool.
So we've talked a little bit about some of the childhood experiences that you've interwoven into some of the stories. How do you take more universal childhood experiences and then make them particular to the world of Little J and Big Cuz?
I suppose it's having a look at some of the experiences that we have on Little J and Big Cuz, and whether it's, like for instance, there's one episode where we talk about the pen license, and Big Cuz is really reluctant to take on that pen license, but it's being able to talk about it in a way that that builds her confidence. And what was with that pen license story, Claire? Remind me. Old brain box here happened.
The detective. It's is it the detective one?
That was
Yes.
with the bowerbird. Was the stolen the pen, but the one I really love thinking about, because it's such a universal story that's where our collective brainstorming works so beautifully. Was we'd made with those lists, we'd talked about cubby building as being every kid across the world has built a cubby at some stage, whether it's a doona cubby in their bedroom or, on a bush block or something like that. And there's a Beck Cole's story. She really was really working on this kind of cubby idea as we talked around it in the room. We had all sorts of ideas with Little J and his best friend Levi going out and building this cubby, and it was going to be their first big fight as best friends. And we came up with, they find this, some sticks or something to make the cubby out of. And then we asked the question, what would make this a story you'd only see on Little J and Big Cuz? You might have seen the image of it before, and that was where your idea came in for that, Dot.
Yeah, and it was, they'd come across this thing that looked like a cubby, but what it was that it was an old man's camp, and they went in to go and try and claim it as their territory of play until they got told, oi, get out of there, that's an old man's camp.
Yeah, it was Big Cuz told them that.
Yeah, and that's where, where you sort of turn that universal story into a local story.
And then Beck spun it that what they saw wasn't really much of a home. They saw it just as a pile of junk and pulled it apart and made it into, a sort of pirate ship kind of thing. So it was just a really beautiful way of looking at something that is very universal but also very culturally specific. And we could talk more broadly about what's home,
And belonging.
but in a very playful way. Yeah.
What impact do you think the voice actors themselves have on the scripting process?
They bring it to life. They just spin their own little magic onto the words that we write.
And then once it was cast, so after series 1, then because they're just such extraordinary actors that have come to the show, they inspire the writers and our development process, because we can hear how they're going to say various lines. So, and that Levi's a really good example. Levi was a fairly minor character in series 1, but we all just love how Ursula Jovic voices Levi, who you heard telling the serpent story just then. And so Levi's become sort of our fourth main character after Little J, Nana and Big Cuz.
Oh, don't forget Old Dog.
Oh, yes, our fifth main character, our fourth main human character. And so it becomes like a co-creation between the writers and the actors, because it becomes greater than the sum of its parts in that way. Yeah.
Great. I've just got one more question before we're going to let our audience have a chance to ask you some questions themselves. Let us know, how's the show's been received, both on NITV and ABC?
Might be better to.
Oh, look, the response has been building and building, but it's been very, very strong. One of the things we did before we finished the production of the first series was that we took rough cuts of the little episodes on a bit of a road trip through, from Darwin down through the desert to Broome and Fitzroy Crossing and Broome, and then up to Cape Leveque and across, and then we went up to Arnhem Land, and we just stopped at every childcare centre and school and different place we could, and showed people little grabs and asked people questions and saw whether people were seeing certain layers that are in the scripts that some people will pick up on and others won't, and so on.
Had you cast voice talent by that stage when you did that?
We'd done these were sort of rough cuts of the first record, and that was another thing about the voice talent, is that we were fortunate that the very first record everyone was in the studio. The clip we show you at the beginning is from Series 2, even though we're launching, we're about to go to air on ABC with Series 3. The reason for that is, of course, during Season 3 it was COVID and the actors couldn't be in the same, they couldn't all be there working in ensemble. So we recorded them all individually on extraordinary setups with, an engineer in Melbourne, an actor. Deb was recording in her own home studio, and directors in Tasmania and Sydney, and, so we did the whole thing like that. But the first series was recorded with this wonderful ensemble where people were just cracking each other up and finding their voices, and Ursula developed this fabulous raspy voice for Levi, based, I think, on a kid she knew. So in terms of response, obviously very nice to win a Logie. Care much more about how many people are watching, and the Logie doesn't hurt in that respect, but it seems that the audience has built. It's a big audience. It's a really big audience, and it's a really, really broad audience, and ages in terms of the demographics, and people seem to genuinely be enjoying it. So.
And also the other thing too is that it's not just television, it's not just audiences that sit in their lounge rooms. A lot of schools use the series when it's quiet time in the classroom for pre-primary and lower primary age. So they use the series to, quieten the kids or at the end of the day, and so kids are able to enjoy it in the classroom as well.
We did a beautiful in Tasmania. There was a live reading of one of the Palawa versions.
Yes,
So
they did. They tweaked specifically for the outside
we did
performance.
a big screen. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So yeah, I think. I mean, for me, going right back to that first time that I was brought into a writer's room in Sydney, Margaret was there. There a lot of people who didn't go on to be writers were in that room. A lot of black fellas from Sydney and Top End and everywhere. But I think it was the genuineness of that we weren't. This was not something that was going to be out of the box, that was going to be typical. This was going to be real. This was going to be what meant something to those writers. So, and that was really when I really thought, wow, this is going to be, this could potentially be very important. And made me really want to stick stick with it. And you know, there were all language versions was a, you know,
Pipe dream.
this pipe dream at that time. But I think, you know, just that we eventually would do a Palawakani version of 3 episodes, and to see what it's kind of meant to the community. That's, as much as the ratings are good and all those other things are great, that's the stuff where you really think, okay, this wasn't just a sort of, we didn't just impose something. This really is something that's important to all these people now, and that's so special.
Yeah, and I think just as a writer, you know, when you have, when you don't get to sit and write for the show, you really miss it. So I keep pestering Ned, come on Ned, when are we going to do another season? I'm really missing the world of Little J Big Cuz. Please Ned, let's do another season. So we've got a 4th season that we've been penning, so.
And we got news late on Friday that Deb and Miranda and Aaron and Ursula are all committed, I think, so.
Oh, fantastic. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so, Dot, because you've written, when at the end of season 4, you will have written 16 episodes across the series. I've been really fortunate to go to Broome to develop to have a couple of, you know, one-on-one story conferences. That's where Serpent's Eye came out, which was fantastic. But also got to, you know, go to Alice Springs when I first started, work with Beck Cole in Alice Springs, worked with Danielle McLean in Darwin, worked with, came down to Hobart to brainstorm with you and with Adam Thompson, who's written an episode in Series 3, and we did table readings yesterday on Zoom. So that's been a really fantastic experience to sort of go across we've got, you know, having writers across the country with contrasting experiences, but, you know, some universality there as well. And it's so, because I've worked in other preschool shows and they're always mildly disappointing when they're, you know, when they go to air, whereas I watch Little J and it's so above and beyond what I was expecting.
It's just more than the sum of its parts.
It is more than the sum of its parts. And I think I just want to, you know, say too that I think that's why it's done really well in sort of the international arena as well, with the finalists in the Japan Prize, and it's screened at the Chicago International Children's Film Festival, and
it was a runner-up in the Prix Jeunesse, which is a big thing in Europe. So.
And I think from that absolute specificity comes universal truths. And that's what speaks to both First Nations kids, but also more broadly to all kids.
One thing we would like to do, or SBS would like to do, which we haven't found the money to do yet, but would be to make like Hindi versions and other language versions, non-English versions, non-Indigenous language, but non-English versions.
That was confusing.
Thank you.
No, sorry.
Well, you heard it here first. Keep an eye out for Little J and Big Cuz Season 4. Do we have any questions from the audience? I have a microphone that'll come around.
Hello. I've got 2 questions. The first one you sort of touched on about showing internationally. Other than festivals, has it shown internationally on TV, or is there interest for that?
Shall I answer that? Yeah. It's very slow at the moment. What we really need to do with this, and it's another whole separate job, is to go and take it to educationalists and to sort of opinion leaders. At the moment, it's basically going through your usual sort of industry channels where people are looking at, is there 100 or 150 episodes already? Is there this? Is there that? It's one of the many reasons we decided to do some dolls and so on, is to start to build all those other elements that that broadcasters actually want, because one of the reasons they do, well, actually, the main thing that drives the development of most children's show is is selling toys. That's really. I talked to a producer at a conference, an American producer, who was looking at the show and just saying, I would give my right arm to be able to start with an idea and start with stories we wanted to tell kids rather than starting with the toys, you know. So we're sort of going the other way round, and hopefully one day it'll break through. But in the meantime, that idea of doing other language versions also has a capacity, even within Australia, to broaden that audience out. But no, it's slow. We've got small sales. They're mostly like package sales. We've got some, like a little US network, it's like an educational network that has taken it, and, you know, New Zealand, Maori TV and so forth. But in terms of breaking into that mainstream overseas, that's quite tricky. Also, look, to be honest, when we developed the show, we said this is for Australia, and we're not going to make it work for the international audience, because it won't necessarily work in Australia if we do that. That's the next step, is to work out how to take it to that level.
My next question, I'm interested to hear, and you've talked a little bit about this, but about the consultation/engagement and how that process works, and if that's ongoing or... Yeah, I'm just interested in hearing more about that.
Do you want to say?
It's a bit of an open-ended question.
So the process of engagement.
Well, when you were talking about consultation at the beginning, when you were talking about the design and the stories, and I suppose I'm interested about whether that's something that was at the beginning or as an ongoing thing as each season and each story develops.
Yeah, look, you know, it depends on the stories that get developed, in terms of whether there's further engagement that needs to occur within the community, especially when we start to talk culturally specific stories. There's engagement with the local communities in regards to the use of those stories and permission to use them. So yeah, there's that. But in terms of the overall production and its engagement, that occurs through the languages that we do. So talking with communities that want to produce the shows in their own language.
And
it's fairly ongoing, and in a way the most... Sorry.
And it's sort of every iteration of making an episode, so from scripts through to cutting an animatic with the storyboards, even if we don't have a voice record. Stakeholders get to see those. So, and of course that's NITV. That's Priscilla, an Indigenous person at ASA. They all feed back on things before we get to anything finished. So
some of these things are more cultural and around values, and some of them are really basic kind of safety things. But there's some quite specific examples. For example, on the third series, we had a story where Levi starts telling one of his grandpa's stories, and it's about a mermaid. And we went back through the community that was connected to, and sought permission to use the local word and local designs and things like that around this story. The old man who was owner for that story was sick and was in hospital, and we just backed away because it became apparent that it was going to be too much pressure to try and force that through. So we didn't do it. We made the story with advice. We made the story, but we used English words and we didn't use culturally specific designs. Strangely, in the most recent one, Dot's been involved with me in talking to an owner over in Western Australia, Broomside, with another mermaid story, but we did negotiate that, and you know, it's not an alternative, and we're not getting around this other thing. It's a completely different language. It's different story and so on. But that was given, and we do contracts, we send scripts, we pay a fee, we negotiate all those sort of things. So that's all done very methodically.
Which also happens with the language versions as well. Everyone's treated professionally in that situation, and that's another thing that I think is really important here. It's not, this is not some do-gooding charity thing that we do where we make this magnificent gift to communities. This is about building skills and really trying to bring communities along with us in a way that's about giving them skills as well.
And just going back to how we started the scripting process, it is an all Aboriginal writing team, and before the show was voice cast, we brought a couple of actors in to read scripts out loud with the writers, so we could make sure that the voices we were capturing were authentic. We still do table readings. Sometimes we did some yesterday. Sometimes we bring our voice actors in because, of course, it's now cast, and so that's always talked through. Any minor changes that happen right up until the last minute are always run past the writers. So it's always a collaboration.
Anyway, that's the process of engagement. The long and the short of it.
Yeah.
Negotiating certain things, like, for example, the Aboriginal English that is used in the show, and how from Broome to Ballina, it's kind of how those things vary, and how different words are used and so on, and trying to find that has been quite complex. And then in the classroom, we actually use something much closer to standard English, unless a kid's channeling their grandfather, in which case they revert to.
So we
it
do a
gets
little
really
code
complex when
switching.
you start to break.
So early in season 1, we put together a glossary. I did that with writer Erica Glynn, and then Dot, you've put together a sort of body language glossary, for want of a better word, too. So around
and there were lots of lessons
gestures
that we
and-
learned through that.
Yeah.
Pointing, things that are just rude culturally that I didn't understand that we learned.
That you
Chin
are,
pointing.
yes, yeah. Chin point, not finger point.
Yeah, chin point, not finger point, or lip point.
Yeah.
That's a good lesson for life. I think we've got time for one more question. Just over here.
How did you get the show together and get all the people you need for it?
What was the last one?
How did you get the show together and get all the people you need for it?
Whoa. It was a really big job. We've been working on it for nearly 10 years. It takes a long time, and it's lots and lots of phone calls and meetings and talking to people and making arrangements with them, and it took a really, really long time. But we had some fabulous people come. Tony came in early, Dot came in early, Claire came in early on the show.
Neil.
And Neil up the back. But also these wonderful actors like Deb Mailman and Miranda Tapsell. Deb I knew quite well because she was one of the leads in a film I made called Radiance with Rachel Perkins directing, and it was Deb's first big movie, and so we've known each other a very long time. But many of the other actors I didn't know well, but they got interested. Partly they really got interested because they liked the scripts, and a lot of work had gone into the scripts, and when they read them they went, yeah, this is pretty good, we'd like to do it. Deb, Miranda, who plays Little J, also did a lovely hand-washing message for us when the COVID first broke out. And we made that in a couple of days and got it out on social media, and 500,000 people saw it in the space of about 2 or 3 days.
But also the very important message about how you get a show like this made is that you need to pay people to do it.
That's
So
Which means mortgaging Ned's house.
So yeah, so it's people getting employed to work together
Yeah.
in a room together or across the country, to all come together, see the story on paper in print. Some go away and draw the story, and others keep writing it, and then people put the voices to it. Then voices to the words, but all those people that work on it all get paid to do it.
and there's about 150 of them.
So a lot of people.
And then the composers too.
Yes,
Yes.
yeah, beautiful.
That's about all the time we've got for today. Can I please get you to put your hands together for our amazing guests, Ned Lander, West, Clare Madsen and Tony Thorne.